Hi, everyone, and welcome to the UX Research Rundown podcast, second season. My name is Henrik Mattsson, and I am the CEO of Lookback and also your host for this podcast. And today, we do not just have one guest with us, but we have a UX research team with us who just started working together quite recently. And they're here to talk about the same thing we always talk about, but we always find new things. How do you get your team along on the research, on the journey that is research? So, without further ado, let me introduce my guests. We have Jeremy Bailey and Nadya Calderon, who are with us here today and started working 6 weeks ago together. So I'll let you kind of give us a bit of your background, origin stories as researchers, and kind of the company you work at presently, and some of the challenges and stuff like that, and then we'll jump straight in. So Jeremy, we can start with you. Welcome.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for having us. We did just start working together. We're working together at a company called Thinkific. That's, laser focused, hyper focused, whatever focus like the most focused on our customer is a creator educator who is basically someone that has, what we call unique genius, but some expertise or passion that they want to share with others and build a business around it by specifically by teaching others, by educating, similar to the way you're, sharing your expertise around research with this podcast. So, we'd want to help you, Henrik, build a business around that. And a lot of these creators really need help with that. So I lead the experience design and research teams, and alongside Nadya and a couple others. And then I've previously worked at startups for about 15 years. I say startups because I'm still in that headspace of 0 to 1 and often using the customer insight to build new value, create new value in the world. And been doing that by hook or by crook, by any means necessary, often hacking together solutions. But now, at Thinkific, what's really exciting is I actually, have a great team with a lot of expertise, but I've done it every which way, with team, without team. Really excited and grateful to have a team. So I'll pass it off to Nadya to introduce the research function at Thinkific.
Cool.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah. So I'm Nadya, and I'm currently I am the UX research lead at Thinkific. Where did I start? I actually became a UX researcher via, I think, a path that it's not so uncommon for UX researchers. I've been part of product teams for a long time. I started as a software developer, actually. That's where my original background is in. But very early in my career, I realized that I really care about the who in the equation of any line of code that I was building. It's like, who's going to use this in the end? So I took a long journey. I thought I was going to stay in academia, so I did a PhD in human-computer interaction. And that really marked the transition towards UX research for me. And so in the industry, I have been for about 5 years, started working with startups. Before that, I was doing mostly consulting works in little engagements. And the last 2 years and a half, I've been part of setting up the practice of UX research at Thinkific for understanding and being the advocate and helping leadership with our creator educator goals and purpose.
Awesome. Well, thanks. It's great to have you here. So I heard here before the show a rumor that UX sits directly under kind of strategic leadership somehow. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, like how the team sits in the larger organization?
Yeah, Nadya, maybe. Yeah, I think Nadya is the best person to tell this story.
Yeah, to be honest, I have been quite feel that we have been in a privileged position in the way that the UX research team have the history of the research team at Thinkific, because we originally came and became part of the experience design and research team, so under design. But because of the nature of where the organization was at the time of still uncovering a market corner and understanding who are we really going to target in the market, there was a big need for a space for us to influence who are these creators educators, what are the problems, what what, and like most specifically, like who are they really? And so we started working closely with leadership from the beginning, and it was a matter of an equation of resourcing at that time. Given that we were just starting setting up the practice, we decided not to get embedded into product teams or to like right away work into supporting product teams, but working closely with leadership. And for a while we didn't have Jeremy on board, I actually was directly reporting to our chief of strategy. And so I think it was the nature of where we were at the time, and so we had always seen UX research as a part more of an insights function, not necessarily directly linked to product. So we're still like now with Jeremy as our leader, we still seeing as part of the design design and research organization, but we have like this dotted line always connected to strategy, which I have found is exciting, and it's a really privileged position where to be and where to be thinking UX research from.
Yeah, it's I think a lot of teams start the other way around. They start embedded in some very specific product problem, and then they try to move into more of kind of, hey, we have something to say about strategy. So that's a super interesting story. So Jeremy, is all of this about to change now, or like what are your hopes and expectations for the year?
Well, I think it's funny that you share that the usual way is for it to start in some other function and to try and influence strategy. That's how it started, I think, in my career, at least in tech, where there was no research function. I worked for 11 years at a company called FreshBooks, which it's become a global company, and I was there for a lot of the ride. But in the earliest days, it was bootstrapped. We were like, building whiteboards from scratch. Don't ask me how. And the research function, I remember, came from the fact that I wanted to do some user testing. And I remember my boss telling me, who was the VP of product, no, we don't have time. You don't have time for that. You don't have, money for that. We're going to, it's always the same thing, right? And I was like, I'm going to do it anyway. So borrowed someone from the support team. And I remember the first user tests we ran, we ended up demonstrating that the company was losing something like $5 million a quarter because of this, like the screen would go black for a certain percentage of users when they signed up for the product. And then people were like, oh, how could we do more of this? And then slowly, with various projects, built influence for like research should even exist in an organization. And eventually got to the point that Nadya has, established at Thinkific, where we built an insights team outside of design, and that was, had a quant and a qual and was helping drive some strategy. But I still think like it's a beautiful hack just from day one to report directly into a strategy officer or directly into the C-suite, because that was like a 10-year influence journey that I took. And I told you the nice version of it, like not the sloppy, political battles version of it.
We'll get to that in the in the podcast to the extent that you're comfortable. No, but joking aside, I think it's interesting that when we talk about engagement with research, right? We want the team, we want stakeholders to buy into what we're doing, and not because we just want that to happen for some other reason, but it's good when that happens. It's as we discussed before we started recording, the experiences in teams that I talk to are very different. Some people have a lot of this and it works and it's great, and when it works, everyone agrees it's great. I'm yet to meet a team where it's like, oh no, we have too much engagement with research and it's really hurting our products. Like, no one ever said that. But there are a lot of teams where this doesn't happen. But I think that your case also kind of shows that, well, engagement with whom, right? Because you can have engagement with the leadership team, and you can have engagement with your product team, and these are different journeys. So that's really interesting. If we go to the question about kind of what is like research engagement to you? Is there one of these things that in your experience have been more powerful, like engagement from like high up stakeholders, or engagement from like the close to the product team? Or can you talk a little bit about I guess they're both important in their own ways, but can you kind of share some of your experiences when it comes to those things? I can start with Jeremy this time.
Okay, so yeah, the question is like engaging teams in research, or
Yeah,
okay, yeah. I mean,
different forms of engagement, right?
yeah, I mean, the primary form of engagement for a lot of my career was to force the engagement to happen. So it was like, go to the customer's office, like get on the phone, pick up the phone, because specifically there'd be a conversation where there was a lot of embedded assumption. I was like, we better check out some of those assumptions, make sure that they're right or wrong, and then the reaction around engagement, it took care of itself after the forcing function typically. So once the team had an excuse, and had the time allotted or the support needed, I would often joke that it was like they had come back from some kind of like all night bender or something, like they had just done drugs, because they would be so excited and so high on the experience that they just had, that they're like, how come no one told us sooner that like work could be this engaging, and that like, there could be so much to learn. And I'd be like, yeah, I did. I thought I told you this is the way.
Right.
So it's mostly been about pushing people over that speed bump. And I'm even in the earliest days, it was about automating recruiting. Like I remember, when I told you I brought in that customer support person, I still got a lot of pushback from teams if it wasn't my own work, that we don't have time to recruit or whatever. So I remember, I think I read Gothelf's Lean UX, and he suggested, hey, just make sure the people show up on a Thursday. And so that's what we did. Like the customer would actually show up in the office, and the team would be like, what do we do with them? And I was like, I don't know. Like, what are you working on? Why do you share it? And then that became an embedded kind of thing. So it's always been making it easy to say yes, and in some cases forcing the yes.
Right. And kind of, it's interesting the story you tell about how they expected perhaps something else, or they your experience was that you told them like, hey, this is going to be useful, please come along on this thing, and then once they came along they were like, oh, how come you didn't tell us this was going to be great? So I've seen that a lot. I remember my first time I engaged, like I was observing a research session, and I was like, this is so cool, and and then you'd say that to the researcher, and they were like, yes, like this is what I do, right?
I know.
So a lot of it is just to get people to take that first step. So Nadya, how, if you, to the extent that you feel comfortable sharing, like what's special about that leadership team that just kind of, because I guess they recruited a research team before they even needed to do some kind of product research. They knew they were going to do discovery, and the way they were going to do that was to go and like, hey, we're going to research it. I mean, that is pretty rare, I would say, that's how it starts. Like, where do you think that came from, and kind of what experiences preceded that for them, that kind of, to the extent that
Yeah, interesting. Also, like the question of engagement, I think there is no UX researcher that thinks about this day and night.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say precisely that the story is like they thought that they were going to create a new product, and then they realized, oh, we need to do research. Like the product was well established by the time like a UX research function came to be. But like I suppose the uniqueness was Thinkific was in hypergrowth at that time. So it's like, how do we get from being startup, with this innovative idea to growth, and fortunately, I do remember I joined and always have been grateful for joining a team where I always felt there was a leadership, customer centricity, culture, and values. So there was not a lot of buying into like how important is that. There was more a piece of like how does UX research can really help us, like what can you do for us. And so I think I was at that time a leader in design took the bet and said like, I think we need a UX research team. And so that's how it got started. And then once again, it just happened that at that time of the decision, we decided to start working more on the strategic questions rather than the product directly questions. And so we had this space to prove the value that we could bring to the organization. When it comes to engagement, it is, I think, the first thing that came to mind. You're right. Like it's not only the how are we engaging, but when. Like engagement takes different different like manifestations, if you wish, like in the when in the process are we
Mm.
engaging. And so something that we have been very clear at Thinkific is engaging early, especially with leadership. So I have this cool example of we were getting together to launch, like to start thinking and ideating about a new product. And I remember sitting in a room with like the leaders of that project, of that initiative, and just by engaging them and giving them the space to like feeling that the team that was going to run with the project had like a download of their heads, right? And so at that time, I remember one of the leaders in the room telling me at the end of we ran a design workshop or an ideation workshop, and tell me, wow, thank you, I really needed to make sure that you had my download. And that was really everything they needed to feel like confident, and then the team. So that was a very important piece of the engagement. It's not only the how, but the when, because often when we think about engagement, we think about like, let's show them the interviews, let's show them how the user actually behaves, how they feel, how they talk. But I think we really think, if we think about the entire process. Also because if we engage them early with them, like they will continue with us through the process until the very end. And so it's more likely that the outcomes of our research are received because our direct questions to what answers to the questions that they had, or have a very specific action into where they were looking to act. That's how, whenever we have work at that more of a strategic level, obviously we do our best to bring them to the sessions, to make sure they're sitting in the room when we're conducting interviews, for example. So that is a very humane piece. It's so important that they get to connect with the human on the other side. But I would like speak highly of how important it is through the entire process, not just these moments that we find very emotionally connected, but like the importance of the process.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I remember I had a conversation with one of my researchers once where we were talking about the role of reports, right? And what format should a research report have, and whatever. And we realized after a while that it doesn't really matter how, like, our role is not to help you build a report. Our job is to help you build the engagement over time that makes sure that people read the report. And it's like what you're saying about this kind of this long process where you have to start early, like get their download so they feel a part of it and everything. I mean, this really resonates with me. So I want to kind of play into, find it so interesting that you have these in the same room now. I have two people that have slightly different experiences of kind of their journey to building engagement in teams and everything. And, this is how the world looks, but it's rare that I have both perspectives in a podcast. So sorry if I'm typecasting.
That's good.
But Jeremy, when you when you hear this stuff about like, the how it works over there and everything, and is your experience, do you think that is a journey that is still as common, or do you think that kind of what Nadya is talking about is the new way, or is that more common now? Or can you talk a little bit about how like this is shifting in the industry, if you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly share from my personal perspective, working across a few companies too, and even my own role and in my own title and how that's shifted. Like, I remember, I started out actually I started as an art director, very unconventional, and then became a creative director in a product organization. People didn't understand what that meant. And then I eventually had this title, head of experience, and came up with it with the CEO at FreshBooks because the influence that we were building within the organization from the design function, we didn't want to limit it to, and this had been true for my entire career, to product specifically, that we were trying to build experiences for the customer, and they didn't care about Conway's Law. They didn't care what department we were in. They just wanted a good experience end to end. They didn't care what department delivered it. I've always been really passionate about that, and so for me, the evolution has been clear for going on like 2 decades, because I started out in market research way back when, and actually I was a research assistant before that in sociology. But anyway, so I have some research acumen, but it was always in service of delivering this unified experience. And so from my perspective, that's actually the evolution, is like insight as like the foundational kind of data. And we have chief data officers, and I feel like almost they took a lead in terms of establishing like, hey, data is really important to companies. And the quants won on that front. But the evolution of like an insight function to me is like the evolution of the data side that has evolved and the UXR side coming together to become the foundation of decision making. Period. I always say, like, whenever I've requested a UXR role, this will really improve our decision making. And an organization like wins or loses by its ability to make good decisions, right? Because every day we have the opportunity to make a right or wrong decision. And in my experience, the decisions that are informed by customer insight tend to be correct. I don't know why. I wonder why. But it turns out business is nothing except like a handshake scaled, up to 300, 400, 10,000 people. And maintaining that handshake across 10,000 people, that like look in the eye, that trust, requires a really strong foundation and connection to the customer. And I think that's where the evolution of an insights function in a business. I'd be fine if Nadya didn't report to me. And frankly, I see the future as, Nadya or someone like her in a strategic position within a C-suite or executive function, because it's so important. And I don't know why it's taking so long to get there, but that's where I see kind of the end game. Because that's what every CEO's first job is. And the executive functions that exist in most companies are the CEO scaling themselves, right? Like firing themselves in various roles.
Yeah.
And then hiring in different functions like people officer or whatever, strategy officer, marketing officer. It's only going to be a matter of time before there's like an insights officer, and there's already data officers, right? So probably that role gets combined at some point because we're like, what the fuck? It's like, we're just trying to make good decisions here. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on the podcast, but it seems
you are allowed. I'm Swedish, so almost anything goes.
It's taking a long time, but I can see it's coming. We're almost there.
Yeah, interesting. Anything to share on that note, Nadya?
Yeah, I mean, I do. What the original question was is like if this is the new norm.
Yeah, like where is this
not.
going,
Like,
right? The evolution of how engagement happens. And
I was just telling Jeremy that it's such a vivid and important discussion at this time. Every time that I join the learners conference, all the UXR conf, there is always some talks about like strategic research versus tactical research versus and even the role of tooling on it, right? Like when we think about look back and everything that allows us to do evaluative research and bring participants in on the ride. I always think about like, but at what scope of research are we talking about? And I think it's a really valid discussion. I have heard so many good speakers sharing experiences of how these insights teams have shaped around not only being UX research, but like mixed methods for the win, right? Like the combination of quantitative data and behavioral data into product with the depth and the richness of what UX research can bring. So I do think, like, I am a believer that's the type of career that I want to build for myself. That's the type of organization that I would like to continue working for. So I do hope that is more of the future of our roles looking like. I don't know if the space is in there for all organizations at this point, but yeah.
Yeah, no, and I actually think that is why tooling is limited. And I say that as a tool person. I think that for these insights role to kind of to lead to better decision making, the contact surfaces where that better decision making is happening are so complex. And that's why we're seeing, like, with Figma and tools like that, you have this like real-time collaboration. And I think this idea that like a tool will generate an insight, you can just like open the tool and here's your insight. I don't really think that can be possible. I think what tools can do is they can support teams in ways of working together that allows them to start early, that allows them to build engagement over time, that allows them to do these things. So that's what I think about when I hear you speak. Yeah, Nadya.
And on that topic, one another note is how important is actually that the right tools help us researchers to free some of our cycles and our
Mm.
time to do this other kind of
Mm.
research, right? Like, for example, I think Thinkific, don't get me wrong, not everything that we do is just like these big strategy problems. We're working also a lot on the enablement and how do we help others then do research, you know, who they are, PMs,
Mm.
designers, product marketers, like how do we enable all those others who do research to face the same challenges, like recruit better, bring along their teams, and so on, like engagement with their teams. And so tooling in that case is extremely
Yeah.
important because it helps us like better build processes for them to run slightly leaner in that sense, and not being research not being perceived at that level as a blocker. So it's extremely important. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks. I agree, but I just think it's interesting to think about like how, and I've been super interesting to have both of your perspectives on this, like the where is the insight truly produced? And I would argue, here's my proposal, and it might be wrong or simplified or something, but I think it is produced in the complex day-to-day interactions and relationships in a team. And this idea that like we can have insights tools that generate insights, I think is flawed. Tools can help this. So that's my critique against tools like my own. It's like we can help. I think this point of like helping researchers stay on target and doing relevant things instead of like, doing manual Excel file like participant management and stuff like that. That's obviously something we can help you with, right? And like making all of these flows. But I'm not sure that tools can generate insights. So I don't know. What am I totally?
Yeah. No, do I get to go first, or Nadia? Actually, it's your turn to go first, is it? I'm always reminded of a researcher who, and this is something I guess that was in school that I missed, but a researcher reminded me of it on my team at FreshBooks, that reality is unknowable, right? So like, if we start from the assumption that research is only helping us like widen the straw, a little bit so that we can see reality again from a very subjective point of view. Maybe I'm a postmodernist in this sense, and not just going to come at me with objectivity, but like that, the postmodern condition is that we can't possibly really know reality, but we can seek to better understand it. That really plays into this equation, and therefore, like when you say teams, like you're talking about multiple straws adding up to make that straw even wider, right? To synthesize a more a more kind of accurate view of reality. I also once took a research workshop with a master synthesizer, and they're like, yeah, you have to make inferences at some point. Like at some point, some human being has to make an inference about what they heard. And that's another word for that is a best guess, based on the observation and the lived experience of that individual. But they're not like immune from the ladder of inference, right? And so just acknowledging that we make inferences is part of like giving the team permission to actually critically think. And so in my opinion, like that's where the researcher plays a huge, huge role, is in confidence building within an organization around not opinion, but around like observation, like learning to listen and how to make inferences while acknowledging, bias. Anyway, that's like my art answer to the question. There's probably like a more, like a practitioner point of view I'm missing, but that's kind of what I've observed as well.
Cool.
I have no argument against that. I believe in that as well. And you're right. Like, I mean, any person that is deeply in the qualitative realm will say that at some point we're all making inferences, right? It's not that like we have a crystal ball that is telling us the truth, because what is the truth to begin with? But for example, we do believe on once again the tooling and the right practices. For example, we created a method or a system where we teach or we help others. Like, I think confidence is the right word to say that, because how do we feel confidence in the confidence in the inferences that we're making? In the academic world, you do that through peer reviewing, or through intercoded reliabilities, like multiple people looking at the data and finding that you are coherently getting to the same place or coding it in the same way. But we can translate some of those things to our industry practices. And we have built this we call them at Thinkific walk the walls. I think they are known from, I don't know from what design practice back in the day. But when we came to 2020 and the digital world, we just became masters of building these beautiful Miro boards just full of stickies. And we said, like, for something to become an inference, you have to have at least 3 different voices representing that statement that you want to make. And for example, we made it part of our practice. Is like, please make sure that for some, we call them I statements. Like, we build this I feel, want to do this, anything. I have a problem with this. But for something to become an I statement, you have to have 3 different voices representing that I statement. And it's not 3 different stickies of the same person, literally it's 3 different voices. And so, yeah, there's always the role of inference, but of good practice too in the research, like the importance of researchers bringing this.
Yeah, that's very insightful. I think that what both of you are saying makes me realize that probably when engagement happens, because engagement means that everyone needs to want to play along by themselves, right? And I think creative people that build stuff together want to play along by themselves when it feels meaningful and helpful, and if they're a part of it, right? And one part to make that happen is to kind of start early with people. Don't like call them when everything is done and it's like, this is what I found, But another part is also to, like, I think we can feel as, and I'd love to have your perspective on this, but I see, like, in highly functioning teams, we're creating space for each other's and feeding off each other's inferences. And we're like, oh, right, yeah, that makes me think of, oh, yeah, this, okay. And so I wonder if, like, the key to research engagement is in setting up that game. And I think that research leadership can have a huge role in that. So what do you think?
Well, yeah, Nadya, I think it's your turn to go first. What's worked for you?
Yeah, I keep going back to, I feel just researchers are well equipped in understanding what are the levels of inference that, and the type of, the strength of confidence and reliability that you can make depending on the methodology that you're deploying, depending on the problem that you're facing, right? And so it plays a huge role on bringing that to the practice and to enabling that for the organization. But I wouldn't say that researchers alone can do that. Like, every single time that a decision has been made, there's so many players involved, so many perspectives, like the business perspective, the product perspective, the research, the design. Absolutely.
I think the only thing I'd add, like, this is more on my practical tilt, would be that, like, cycle time really matters in terms of, like, continuous engagement. So, we often measure our products by the active usage, but research could be also measured by active usage. And teams get really uncomfortable when I talk about this. So I'm sure my team's going to listen to this podcast and be like, you bastard, Jeremy, just like make your lives miserable. But again, speaking to the forcing function I mentioned earlier, I have found that if teams are not engaging weekly, at least with a customer, and this is true for myself, by the way, and I notice it in myself, and it's taken many years for me to notice this in myself too, is that it's like a muscle that relaxes, and the fitness of the thinking in relationship to the customer versus assumptive reasoning, you can lose that muscle, and so it requires like continuous practice. And so I think a research team plays a certain role, but then teams that delegate the function of research to a researcher entirely tend to become some of the worst teams I've ever worked with, and because they're spoiled in the worst ways possible, and then they also disregard the research. The researcher's trying to convince them again that, like, this is valuable. So the best teams I've ever worked with, we're continuously, and by the way, sometimes we're foregoing quality, And that's a problem. I don't want to pretend it's not, where like, users lie to you. That's like a thing. And, a bad research practitioner will be like, well, the user said to do this, we better do it. Like they drank the Kool-Aid and they got poisoned. But it's better than the alternative, which is like, no connection to reality at all. So I've tended to like try and, mix it up continuously, but make sure that there's like a constant training program and that people are doing things continuously.
Yeah, totally. We were talking about how CEOs kind of gradually fire themselves from different jobs. And one thing that I found is that I just speak more and more to users. Like I run demos of our product now, and people always ask me like, what are you doing in the demo? Like, don't you have people to run the demo? But I feel like the more I do this, the more I need to like be in almost daily conversations with people that are using the product. And it's exactly what you're saying. And you can replace that to some extent with like observation. And yes, there are some risks that like, of course, like I'm not a researcher. I'm going to, if I actually think that I've done research, I can get us into trouble because I'm like, well, I asked them what they wanted and they said this thing, so let's go build that. But I think that's only a problem. That's a problem I saw like many years ago in our industry where we didn't do a lot of research. Like if you talk to 5 customers in a month and then like 3 of those were your CEO like thinking that they were, a researcher, then you have a problem. But if you're doing like continuous research and some people run out and like do some bad research and think something, like it kind of drowns in all of that collective thing. So yeah, I really like that. Cool. We have reached the part of the podcast that is my least favorite part, which is where I think it's all super interesting, but we have to call it because it's running out of time. But I would like to give everyone here kind of an opportunity to, based on the discussion we've had today and this theme and kind of your personal experiences of this, can you share with our listeners who are often coming into the space perhaps, or they're in places where this hasn't worked so well, perhaps they're in like an earlier version of your journey, Jeremy, when you're trying to kind of get everyone to even show up. Could you share some kind of things that you have learned that perhaps gave you hope that this is possible? Perhaps kind of some people that you can ally with, some tips. It could be anything really. We can start with Nadya, and then we'll finish with you, Jeremy.
Maybe I will go back to that first piece that I was reflecting about the importance of looking at the entirety of the process, not just at this moment of the interaction with the customer, but like really the interaction with the customer starts when we have a good problem to go and try to solve with them, right? And so I was reflecting about how when it comes to decision making, how important is like the engagement with every stakeholders in. Someone said like that a problem well defined is a problem half solved, and that like oftentimes is not just the researcher defining what a good problem to go and solve is. Like it requires all of these different voices from product and business. And so I would say that not overlooking that piece, it has been really important in my career, and that's not something that I initially we always talk generally speaking about like engagement with your stakeholders, but it's a really important part of the process at the beginning. And when I was just getting started, I thought it was more about making sure that like they were following on my research, but it's like really bringing them as part of like the problem definition. And that really is where everything starts to go on and build from there. So I would say that.
Love it. Thanks. Jeremy, no pressure. Last words.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'll go back to like the beginning of my career. But like 25 years ago, I worked in market research, I mentioned, and I remember it was youth market research. And I did like trend forecasting for like, Tropicana orange juice or whatever. But one of the things we would always share with clients back then was that kids these days, and so these are now like middle-aged adults, they really want to talk back to the brands. They want to participate in the creation of your products. And by the way, at that time, this was a radical insight that we were sharing. And we would build these like customer panels, where the teenagers would log in and share their diaries and like lives. with the CEO at Tropicana or whatever, right? And it would blow their minds every single time. Like, wow, because they just want to give, and share and co-create. And I remember, when at FreshBooks, when I encountered the same hurdle of the team being like, well, it takes too long to recruit and stuff. I was like, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to send an email to all of our customers asking them whether they'd like to talk to us. And would you believe that 15,000 people said they'd like to talk to us, and that those people were available within 48 hours most of the time? So what I've learned over and over and over again is people, your customer actually wants to participate in creating a better product. It benefits them, right? And I think a lot of teams have this assumption that that they're abusing the customer, or they're taking advantage of them, when for 25 years at least, I've had the insight that like the world generally wants to create something greater together. And so, yeah, Obama wasn't wrong, or something. That's like my final word. There's hope.
Yeah. Well, beautiful. I completely agree. I had a colleague of mine who taught me once. I'm going to add my own little tip here since we're at it. She told me once, when people are very upset with you, when customers are very upset with a company, she's like, they're going to have that is passion that comes generally from that they care about you. They care about this product. They care about the experience that they had, and they're disappointed, and they feel, if you can engage with them and you can make them co-creators, you're going to get that passion, but like the other way around, right? So, and it has been true, I think, every single time. Like whenever customer support has a really angry customer, I'm just like, give them to me. I'm going to turn them into co-creators. So yeah, lot of wisdom. I love both of those things. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining, and it was just fun to have a full team. So I wish you all the best of luck with your new collaboration. Just based on this, I think it's going to be great. So good luck, and have a healthy and nice 2023. Happy researching, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us.